Among the most ancient and malevolent creatures that haunt the darkest corners of legend stands the hag. These beings represent something primal in the human psyche, a manifestation of corruption that transcends simple monstrosity. Where dragons inspire awe and terror through sheer physical magnificence, and where demons represent the chaos of raw evil, hags embody something far more insidious, the calculated, patient degradation of innocence itself. They are predators who hunt not with fang and claw alone, but with deception, manipulation, and a profound understanding of mortal weakness. To encounter a hag is to face a creature that has spent centuries perfecting the art of cruelty, a being that views suffering not as a means to an end, but as the purpose of existence itself. The hag occupies a unique position within the hierarchy of monstrous beings. Unlike many creatures of darkness that operate on instinct or are driven by hunger, hags possess a disturbing level of sapience and cunning that rivals the most intelligent of mortals. Their evil is not the mindless savagery of beasts or the alien malice of aberrations, but rather a deeply intentional, almost artistic form of wickedness. Each action a hag takes is calculated to maximize not just harm, but despair. They do not simply kill. They corrupt. They do not merely destroy. They pervert. In the pantheon of legendary monsters, hags stand apart as creatures whose very existence seems designed to mock the concepts of compassion, mercy, and redemption. The appearance of a hag tells its own story of corruption. Beneath whatever magical disguise she might wear, a hag's true form reflects the twisted nature of her soul. Gnarled fingers ending in iron-hard claws, skin hardened into hide that can turn aside blades, and features so grotesque that the mere sight can physically weaken those who behold them. Yet this hideousness serves a purpose beyond simple horror. The hag's appearance is a warning written in flesh, a declaration that natural law has been violated, that something fundamental has gone terribly wrong. When witnesses speak of encountering a hag, they describe not just fear, but a visceral wrongness, as though reality itself recoils from the creature's presence. What makes hags particularly dangerous is their patience. While many monsters operate on timescales measured in hours or days, hags think in terms of years, decades, even centuries. A hag might spend a generation carefully positioning herself within a community, adopting orphans and molding them into instruments of destruction, all for the eventual satisfaction of watching that community tear itself apart through its own children. She might curse a family line and wait patiently for generations, savoring each new birth as another opportunity to witness her vengeance unfold. This temporal perspective transforms the hag from a simple threat into an existential one. The danger is not just what a hag might do tomorrow, but what she set in motion decades ago, plans that are only now coming to fruition. The study of hags reveals uncomfortable truths about the nature of evil itself. These creatures demonstrate that malevolence need not be loud, dramatic, or immediately visible to be effective. The most devastating evil often wears a kind face and speaks with a gentle voice. It offers help to the desperate, comfort to the grieving, and opportunity to the ambitious. Only later, when the trap has fully closed, does the victim realize the price of accepting such aid. Hags are masters of this slow corruption, understanding that the darkest victories come not from forcing mortals to commit evil, but from convincing them to choose it willingly. The question of how hags come into being reveals a horror that goes beyond simple transformation. The phenomenon known as the change represents one of the most disturbing metamorphoses documented in the annals of the supernatural. Unlike lycanthropy, which requires infection, or vampirism, which demands a specific ritual, the transformation into a hag can be a fate lying dormant within an individual from birth, waiting for the right moment to emerge and destroy everything she once was. The primary theory regarding hag origins suggests these creatures form a distinct species, possibly related to the Fae, but twisted into something far darker. This species faces a unique biological challenge. They require human males for reproduction, yet their natural forms inspire only revulsion and terror. The solution they have evolved is as cunning as it is cruel. Through innate magical abilities, a hag disguises herself as a beautiful human woman, using this false appearance to seduce mortal men and conceive children. The hag carries no maternal affection for the resulting infant. To her, the child represents merely the continuation of her kind, a seed to be planted and abandoned. The method of abandonment reveals the calculating nature of hag reproduction. Rather than simply leaving the infant to die, the hag performs a deliberate swap, replacing a human family's newborn with her own child. This ensures the hag's daughter receives proper care and upbringing, raised by humans who believe her to be their own flesh and blood. For decades, this deception holds perfectly. The girl grows into womanhood, entirely human in appearance and behavior, unaware of the terrible legacy encoded in her very being. She lives, loves, forms relationships, perhaps even has children of her own, all while carrying within her a biological time bomb. The change typically manifests between the ages of 40 and 50, though the exact timing varies. The transformation does not arrive gradually, allowing for adjustment or preparation. Instead, it strikes with horrifying suddenness. The woman's physiology undergoes a complete rewriting at the fundamental level. Her bones thicken and elongate, granting her tremendous physical strength that rivals that of an ogre. Her skin hardens into a hide capable of turning aside sword strikes. Her fingers extend into claws that can tear through flesh and shatter bone. Her senses sharpen to supernatural acuity. Perhaps most tragically, her mind transforms as well, flooded with instincts and desires utterly alien to her previous existence. The woman she was does not gradually adapt to becoming a hag. Rather, that woman is effectively destroyed, replaced by a creature that retains her memories but views them with cold detachment, as though they belong to someone else entirely. An alternative path to haghood exists, one that suggests the condition can be acquired rather than inherited. Ancient folklore speaks of mortal women transformed into hags through the corruption of witchcraft. The goddess Hala, according to legend, taught mortals to access the weave through practices collectively known as witchcraft. This form of magic carries inherent dangers, requiring careful balance and respect for natural forces. Practitioners who delve too deeply into dark magic, who use their powers for particularly heinous purposes, or who simply lose control of forces they do not fully understand risk permanent transformation into hag form. In these cases, the change serves as both punishment and metamorphosis, remaking the witch into a physical embodiment of the corruption she has embraced. Exceptionally powerful curses represent yet another path to hag transformation. When a woman becomes the target of a curse of sufficient potency and malice, the magical contamination can trigger the change, rewriting her nature from human to hag. This method is particularly cruel, as it transforms the victim into the very type of creature that likely inflicted the curse in the first place, perpetuating a cycle of corruption and malevolence. Regardless of the path through which a woman becomes a hag, the result is fundamentally the same. She gains the ability to cast change self at will, allowing her to mask her true appearance behind the illusion of beauty or normalcy. This is not mere vanity, but rather a tactical necessity. The hag's supernatural ugliness would make it impossible to move freely among mortals or conduct the long-term schemes that define hag behavior. With this disguise, she can reintegrate into society, presenting herself as anything from a helpful grandmother to a beautiful maiden, all while her true nature remains hidden beneath layers of deception. The magic wielded by hags operates on principles fundamentally different from the studied arcana of wizards or the granted powers of clerics. Where a wizard learns to manipulate the weave through careful study and practice, and where a cleric channels divine energy granted by a patron deity, a hag taps directly into the natural cycles of the world itself. More precisely, she corrupts those cycles, deliberately perverting natural processes and channeling the resulting dark energy through her own transformed physiology. This corruption is not accidental or incidental. It represents the core of hag magic, the fundamental principle upon which all their supernatural abilities rest. A newly transformed hag, sometimes called a young hag, despite having lived 40 to 50 years as a human, possesses primarily physical advantages. Her strength increases dramatically, her hide becomes tough as boiled leather, and her claws can rend flesh with terrible efficiency. These physical attributes alone make her a formidable opponent, capable of matching an ogre in raw physical combat. However, the magical abilities that truly define hag kind remain dormant, requiring time to mature and develop. Upon reaching her second century of existence, approximately 150 years after the Change, a hag manifests what scholars categorize as minor magic. These spell-like abilities can be employed at will, limited only by the hag's desire to use them. She gains the power to cast Charm Person, bending weak-willed mortals to her service with a touch and a word. Dancing lights allow her to create false illumination, luring travelers from safe paths. Ghost sound provides the ability to project noises from a distance, creating auditory illusions that confound and mislead. Obscuring mist generates concealing fog that grants her tactical advantages. Pass Without Trace erases evidence of her passage, making pursuit nearly impossible. Ray of Enfeeblement saps the strength from opponents, weakening them before combat even begins. The ability to summon monsters provides her with disposable minions. Sleep renders entire groups unconscious, leaving them vulnerable to whatever fate the hag designs. The transition to medium magic occurs at approximately 300 years of age. At this threshold, the hag's corruptive influence over natural forces intensifies significantly. She gains access to more potent abilities, usable 3 times per day. Animal trance allows her to hold natural creatures motionless, their attention locked upon her to the exclusion of all else. Fog Cloud creates dense, concealing vapors far more extensive than her earlier obscuring mist. Hold Person paralyzes humanoid targets, freezing them in place while she approaches at leisure. Invisibility renders her completely undetectable to normal sight. Scare projects raw supernatural fear, sending victims fleeing in panic. Speak with Animals grants her the ability to communicate with beasts, turning them into spies and informants. More powerful summoning magic allows her to call forth greater monsters. Tongues removes all language barriers, permitting her to understand and speak any language. Water breathing enables prolonged underwater activity, expanding her operational range. The 800th year of a hag's existence marks her ascension to major magic, abilities so potent they can be employed only once per day, yet capable of altering entire regions. Animal growth transforms normal beasts into creatures of massive size and corresponding strength. Animate Dead raises corpses as undead servants, providing her with tireless, obedient minions. Insect Plague summons vast swarms of biting, stinging insects that can drive entire communities into flight. Solid Fog creates vaporous barriers that impede movement while providing concealment. Enhanced Summoning Magic calls forth truly dangerous monsters. Tree Stride allows instantaneous travel between trees, making pursuit across forested terrain essentially impossible. Wall of Thorns creates barriers of razor-sharp brambles that tear apart anything attempting to pass through them. Perhaps more disturbing than these spell-like abilities is the corruptive aura that manifests as a hag ages. This supernatural phenomenon represents the physical manifestation of the hag's effect on natural law itself. Within a specific radius of her body, the normal functioning of nature simply ceases. Weather patterns become nonsensical and contradictory. Snow might fall during the height of summer, coating the ground in frost while the sun beats down with midsummer intensity. Blizzards might strike during spring. Autumn leaves might turn green and reattach themselves to branches. Rain might fall upward. These meteorological impossibilities occur not as random chaos, but as nature attempting and failing to function correctly in the presence of profound corruption. The behavior of animals within the corruptive aura undergoes similarly disturbing inversions. Herbivores that normally flee from threats become aggressive and territorial, attacking anything that enters their domain. Predators that should be apex hunters turn timid and cowardly, fleeing from prey animals. Nocturnal creatures emerge during daylight hours, while diurnal animals prowl through the night. Migration patterns reverse or cease entirely. Hibernating animals wake at inappropriate times. The entire ecosystem enters a state of dysfunction, unable to maintain the normal patterns that define healthy wilderness. The radius of this aura grows with the hag's age, expanding the sphere of corruption she carries with her. A 300-year-old hag, newly manifesting her medium magic, projects a corruptive aura extending 20 feet in all directions. By age 800, when she achieves major magic, the aura has expanded to encompass a 100-foot radius. Ancient hags who have survived for more than a millennium project their corruption across a 300-foot radius, an area so large that entire clearings, ponds, or small villages might fall entirely within their influence. Beyond the spell-like abilities that all hags develop with age, individual hags manifest unique supernatural powers at specific thresholds in their existence. These abilities, gained at the 400th, 700th, and 1000th year milestones, represent the hag's personal evolution, her individual mastery over increasingly esoteric aspects of corrupted magic. The specific powers manifested vary from hag to hag, but certain abilities appear with enough frequency to be well documented. The Cursed Glare represents one such power, a gaze attack of terrible potency. When a hag possessing this ability locks eyes with a victim, she can project pure malevolence through visual contact alone. The effect varies in intensity based on the hag's will and the victim's resilience. Weaker manifestations leave the target dazed, their mind overwhelmed by the assault, unable to think or act coherently for hours or even days. Stronger applications of the Cursed Glare can stop a victim's heart entirely, literally frightening them to death. The body of someone killed by this ability shows no marks of violence, yet the expression frozen on their face tells the story clearly enough. They saw something so terrible that their hearts simply stopped beating rather than process what their eyes had witnessed. Horrific Appearance functions differently from the Cursed Glare, operating as a passive ability rather than an active attack. A hag who develops this power has become so profoundly grotesque that her true, undisguised form exists beyond the normal spectrum of ugliness. The mere act of looking upon her actual appearance inflicts physical harm. Mortals who see her true face feel their strength drain away, their muscles weakening as though they had suffered a wasting disease. This ability makes combat against such a hag particularly dangerous, as merely facing her in battle, looking at her to aim attacks or defend against her movements causes continuous physical deterioration. Warriors find their sword arms growing heavy and weak, their legs unable to support armor's weight, their bodies failing them even as they fight for their lives. The Soothing Song ability seems almost benign when first described, yet proves devastatingly effective in practice. A hag who possesses this power can sing a melodic, hauntingly beautiful lullaby that carries supernatural, soporific properties. All living creatures within 60 feet of the hag who hear this song must resist its effects or fall into deep, unnatural sleep. Unlike normal slumber, sleep induced by a soothing song is profound and difficult to interrupt. Victims do not wake easily from noise or movement, and those who attempt to rouse sleeping companions find the task frustratingly difficult. The hag typically employs this ability to disable entire groups simultaneously, then moves among the sleeping forms at her leisure, selecting victims for whatever purpose she intends. Some she kills. Some she drags away to her lair. Some she simply curses and leaves sleeping, allowing them to wake hours later with no memory of what occurred, only a lingering unease and the gradual realization that something terrible has been set in motion. Weakening touch operates similarly to the ray of enfeeblement that younger hags can project at range, but far more potent and delivered through direct physical contact. A hag with this ability can touch an opponent and channel corrupting energy directly into their body, causing immediate and severe physical deterioration. Muscles atrophy in seconds, bones become brittle, joints stiffen. The victim feels decades of aging compressed into moments, their body suddenly frail and weak. This ability makes the hag's already dangerous claw attacks exponentially more threatening, as each successful strike not only inflicts physical wounds, but also permanently reduces the victim's physical capabilities. The relationship between hags and conventional magic-using classes reveals interesting aspects of hag psychology. Hags universally view their innate, naturally developed magical abilities as superior to the studied magic employed by wizards or sorcerers. They see themselves as inherently magical beings whose powers emerge organically from their nature, while wizards must laboriously study dusty tomes and practice complex gestures, essentially mimicking through artificial means what hags accomplish instinctively. This perspective leads most hags to avoid wizard levels entirely, viewing the pursuit of studied arcana as beneath them, an admission of inadequacy. When hags do pursue class levels, they typically favor physical disciplines. The fighter class appeals to hags due to their impressive natural strength and the tactical advantages gained from formal combat training. A hag with fighter levels becomes a truly terrifying opponent, combining supernatural physical power with refined martial technique. Similarly, the rogue class attracts hags who prefer indirect approaches, those who value stealth, precision strikes, and the exploitation of weaknesses over straightforward combat. Divine magic presents a complex case. Hags cannot become druids despite their deep connection to natural forces, because druidic philosophy requires balance and preservation of natural cycles. The hag's entire existence revolves around corrupting and perverting those cycles, making her fundamentally incompatible with druidic principles. No amount of skill or dedication can overcome this basic philosophical contradiction. However, hags can and do become clerics, though they must obviously revere dark powers compatible with their evil nature. Hag clerics channel negative energy, using their divine power to rebuke and command undead rather than turn and destroy them. They typically access domains that reflect their nature: destruction for their love of ruin, evil for their fundamental alignment, plant for their corrupted connection to natural growth, and trickery for their deceptive practices. The witch class, unsurprisingly, attracts significant numbers of hags, as it represents a middle path between innate magical ability and learned spellcasting, perfectly suited to beings who possess both qualities. While all hags share certain fundamental characteristics, their corruptive magic, their deceptive nature, their profound evil, the species diversifies into several distinct subspecies, each adapted to specific environments and each possessing unique methods of predation and torment. These variations demonstrate the fundamental adaptability of hagkind, their ability to thrive in virtually any environment where mortals might be found and corrupted. The Anis hag represents the pinnacle of physical power among terrestrial hag subspecies. Standing 8 feet tall and weighing more than 300 pounds, the Anis possesses a frame of pure, terrible strength. Her skin displays a distinctive deep blue coloration, while her hair hangs in filthy, matted black tangles that she rarely, if ever, cleans. Despite possessing physical might that rivals or exceeds that of giants, the Anis rarely relies on straightforward combat. Centuries of experience have taught her that direct assaults, while satisfying, lack the refinement of more subtle approaches. The typical Anis hunting pattern involves extensive use of her disguise self-ability to infiltrate mortal society. She might appear as a traveling merchant, a minor noble, or simply a common villager, her false appearance carefully calibrated to inspire trust rather than suspicion. Once she has identified suitable prey, she employs fog cloud to create confusion and separation, dividing groups of travelers or breaking up organized defenses. Within the concealing mist, the Anis drops her disguise and moves with frightening speed, her massive frame surprisingly agile. She prefers to grab smaller opponents, using improved grab techniques that do not provoke defensive responses, then raking her victim with her iron-hard claws while they struggle uselessly in her grip. The Anis delights in the moment of realization that crosses her victim's face when the kindly traveler they were speaking with moments ago is revealed as an 8-foot-tall blue-skinned nightmare. The green hag makes her home in desolate swamps and overgrown forests, environments where nature has grown thick and tangled, where visibility is limited and sounds carry strangely through humid air. Her appearance reflects her chosen habitat: sickly greenish skin that blends with vegetation, hair that resembles tangled vines more than any natural human feature, and an overall aspect of corruption and decay. The green hag has developed specialized abilities that make her the most deceptive of all hag subspecies. Mimicry stands as the green hag's signature ability. She can perfectly reproduce almost any sound she has previously heard, from animal calls to specific human voices, with such accuracy that even close friends or family members cannot detect the deception. Combined with her access to invisibility, dancing lights, and ghost sound, the green hag becomes a master of misdirection and illusion. She lures travelers deep into swamps by imitating calls for help in familiar voices. She creates phantom sounds of pursuing predators, driving victims toward prepared ambush sites. She mimics the sounds of civilization, barking dogs, laughing children, ringing bells to draw lost travelers away from actual settlements and deeper into wilderness. The green hag favors attacks under darkness, particularly moonless nights when visibility drops to nearly zero. Her superior senses allow her to navigate conditions that leave mortals effectively blind. She employs her supernatural weakness touch to sap the strength from armored warriors, reducing them to helplessness before moving in for the kill. However, what truly distinguishes the green hag is not her combat prowess, but her psychological warfare and long-term planning. Documented cases of green hag activity reveal a creature capable of extraordinary patience and manipulation. One extensively studied incident involved a green hag who spent more than 15 years infiltrating a small village. Rather than simply raiding the community for victims, she systematically adopted neglected children, specifically targeting orphans and youths whose parents were absent or abusive. To these children, she presented herself as a loving grandmother figure, insisting they call her Granny and showering them with the affection they lacked elsewhere. Over years, she carefully molded these children, shaping their development and moral understanding, or rather, the lack thereof. She taught them that cruelty was acceptable, that others existed only to be used, that violence was a tool to be employed without remorse or hesitation. By the time these children reached adolescence, they had been transformed into amoral killers, entirely devoted to their granny, utterly lacking in conscience or empathy. The hag then deployed her surrogate grandchildren as lures and accomplices, using them to identify new victims and lead them into traps. The village's own children became instruments of its destruction, and the green hag grew fat on the flesh of villagers, all while savoring the exquisite irony of her revenge against a community that had once driven her away. The sea hag inhabits coastal regions, lakes, and swamps, anywhere that water provides access and concealment. While she is aquatic and possesses natural swimming abilities, she is fully amphibious and can operate on land indefinitely without difficulty. Among all hag subspecies, the sea hag is universally regarded as the most physically repulsive. Her skin displays a sickly yellow color marked with countless warts and oozing sores. Her hair resembles rotting seaweed, giving off a stench of decay and brine. Her overall appearance is so profoundly hideous that the description ugly fails to capture the visceral revulsion she inspires. Unlike her more subtle cousins, The sea hag employs no sophisticated tactics or elaborate schemes. She simply attacks, relying on her passive, horrific appearance ability to weaken opponents before combat even begins. Anyone who looks at her true form feels their strength draining away, their body rebelling against the very act of perceiving something so wrong. Warriors find their weapons suddenly too heavy to lift, their armor too burdensome to support. If this passive effect proves insufficient, the sea hag can actively employ her evil eye ability up to 3 times per day. By fixing her gaze upon a target within 30 feet, she can project supernatural malevolence that either dazes the victim, leaving them standing motionless and helpless, or literally kills them through sheer fright, stopping their heart through the intensity of supernatural terror. In certain subterranean environments, particularly near underground water sources connected to earth nodes, sea hags have been discovered dwelling in bitter isolation alongside aquatic ogres. These specimens typically exist in states of extreme frustration and desperation, obsessively attempting to brew magical potions or perform rituals that might allow them to escape their underground prisons. The psychological toll of subterranean confinement seems particularly severe for sea hags, whose already unstable temperaments deteriorate into something approaching madness. The night hag occupies a category fundamentally separate from her terrestrial cousins. She is not a creature native to the material plane, but rather an extraplanar outsider whose true home lies in the gray waste of Hades, one of the lower planes where evil souls congregate after death. Her appearance reflects her extraplanar nature, flesh the color of a dark blue-violet bruise, covered in blisters and weeping sores, with jet black hair and eyes that burn with hellish red radiance like hot coals embedded in her skull. Night hags operate at the cosmic level, involving themselves in the fundamental economy of evil, the trade in mortal souls. They maintain neutral evil alignment, willing to deal with devils, demons, and other fiendish entities depending on which offers the best price. Their resistance to various forms of attack exceeds that of material hags significantly. Fire and cold pass over them harmlessly, and they cannot be charmed, magically induced to sleep, or supernaturally frightened. This resilience makes them exceptionally dangerous opponents, even beyond their formidable magical abilities. The night hag's signature practice involves riding nightmares, fiendish horses with flaming manes and hooves that leave scorched prints across the plains, using her innate magical abilities to perform dream hauntings. She enters the dreams of sleeping mortals, transforming pleasant sleep into recursive nightmares that leave victims exhausted and psychologically damaged upon waking. Over time, this dream haunting weakens the victim's spiritual defenses, making their soul vulnerable to capture. Once sufficiently weakened, the night hag can extract the victim's soul, trapping it in her possession. These stolen souls become commodities in the planar economy of evil, traded to devils for use in hellish industries, or sold to demons to fuel abyssal war machines. The night hag cares nothing for the politics of the blood war between law and chaos. She simply sells to whoever offers the best price, accumulating wealth and power through her role as a merchant of damnation. Individual hags possess formidable power, but they are fundamentally limited by their solitary nature. Hags are selfish, greedy, paranoid, and pathologically untrustworthy. They view other intelligent beings primarily as victims or tools, and this perspective extends even to their own kind. Under normal circumstances, hags avoid each other, viewing another hag's territory as a potential resource to be claimed rather than respecting boundaries. However, despite their antisocial nature, hags possess sufficient intelligence to recognize a fundamental truth. 3 hags working in concert can accomplish far more than 3 hags working separately. This recognition leads to the formation of coveys, alliances of exactly 3 hags who agree to cooperate toward common goals. The traditional composition of a covey consists of 1 hag of each primary terrestrial type, an anise providing raw physical power, a green hag contributing cunning and manipulation, and a sea hag offering brutal intimidation and her horrific appearance as a weapon. However, this traditional arrangement is not strictly necessary, and coveys composed of 3 hags of the same subspecies or other combinations have been documented. The key requirement is simply that 3 hags willingly enter into a pact of cooperation. Forming a covey requires overcoming the natural paranoia and selfishness that defines hag psychology. Each potential member must be convinced that the benefits of cooperation outweigh the risks of betrayal. This typically requires extended negotiation, the establishment of mutually assured destruction protocols, and carefully balanced power arrangements, ensuring no single member can dominate the others. The resulting alliance is always tense and uncomfortable, built on calculated self-interest rather than genuine trust, but once established, a covey becomes exponentially more dangerous than the sum of its parts. When all 3 members of a covey remain within 10 feet of each other, they can act in magical concert, pooling their individual powers to produce effects far beyond what any single hag could accomplish. The covey casts spells as though they were a single entity of at least 9th level, though the effective caster level increases if the oldest member of the covey has lived beyond certain age thresholds. This collaborative casting grants access to powerful magic that would otherwise remain beyond reach. The spell list available to a functioning covey includes abilities that reshape reality on fundamental levels. Animate Dead allows the creation of undead servants in quantities sufficient to form small armies. Bestow Curse inflicts supernatural maladies that can cripple individuals, families, or even bloodlines for generations. Control Weather grants dominion over meteorological phenomena across entire regions, allowing the covey to generate storms, droughts, or unseasonable conditions at will. Dream provides access to the sleeping minds of victims anywhere on the same plane of existence, allowing psychological warfare at unlimited range. Force Cage creates imprisonment from which escape is nearly impossible. Mind Blank renders the covey immune to divination and mental detection, making them invisible to magical scrying. Mirage Arcana reshapes the appearance of terrain across vast areas, hiding lairs or creating false paths that lead travelers to their doom. Polymorph allows transformation of victims into animals or objects, a punishment both cruel and versatile. Veil disguises entire groups with illusory appearances so convincing that even careful examination fails to penetrate the deception. Vision grants glimpses of past, present, and future, providing intelligence and foresight that makes the covey's schemes almost impossible to counter. Beyond magical power, coveys typically maintain physical forces to execute their will. A typical covey enslaves 1 to 8 ogres and 1 to 4 evil giants, using these powerful creatures as shock troops, laborers, and guards. However, the covey rarely deploys these minions in their true forms. Instead, the hags employ the Veil spell to disguise their monstrous servants as harmless travelers, merchants, or even town guards. This allows the covey to position their forces within target communities without raising alarm, infiltrating settlements, and gathering intelligence, while everyone assumes the hulking merchant or the well-armed guard patrol are exactly what they appear to be. When the time comes to strike, the veils drop, and the horrifying reality of what has been dwelling among the community is revealed, usually far too late for effective resistance. The most prized possession of any covey is the Hag Eye, a magical sensor of extraordinary power and versatility. The creation of a Hag Eye can be attempted once per month by any covey that does not currently possess one. The ritual requires a mundane gemstone worth at least 20 gold pieces, enough to be valuable, but not so expensive that replacement becomes prohibitively costly. Through a ritual whose specific details remain closely guarded secrets, the covey transforms this ordinary gem into something far more sinister. Under normal examination, the Hag Eye appears to be exactly what it seems: a semi-precious stone, perhaps a small topaz or aquamarine, suitable for setting in jewelry or carrying as a personal token. However, when examined through a gem of seeing or similar magic that reveals truth, the Hag Eye's real nature becomes apparent. It is a disembodied eye, living tissue sustained by dark magic, capable of sight and supernatural perception, compressed into gemstone form. The tactical applications of the Hag Eye are extensive. Typically, the Covey has the eye set into a ring, brooch, or amulet, which they then give to one of their disguised minions. The servant wears the jewelry innocuously, attracting no particular attention, while the eye observes everything around it. Any member of the Covey, regardless of how far away she might be physically, can see through the Hag Eye at will, provided both the hag and the eye remain on the same plane of existence. This allows the Covey to maintain surveillance on targets at any distance, to observe locations without physically approaching them, to watch the movements of enemy forces, or to simply gather intelligence about potential victims and their defenses. The Covey typically maintains multiple servants equipped with mundane jewelry matching the appearance of the Hag Eye, ensuring that observers cannot easily identify which piece of jewelry is the actual magical sensor. One minion might wear a dozen rings, only one of which is the Hag Eye, while others wear amulets and brooches that might or might not be magical. This shell game makes identifying and destroying the true Hag Eye significantly more difficult, forcing enemies to either destroy all jewelry worn by suspected agents or develop methods of magically scanning items individually. However, the Hag Eye represents not just a powerful tool, but also a significant vulnerability. The eye possesses only hardness 5 and 10 hit points, resilient enough to survive normal handling, but quite fragile when deliberately targeted. More critically, the Hag Eye maintains a supernatural connection to all 3 members of the Covey simultaneously. If the eye is destroyed, the psychic feedback inflicts damage to every member, but the effect proves particularly devastating to one member. The hag, who sustained the greatest amount of damage from the feedback, is struck completely blind for 24 hours, her vision simply ceasing to function regardless of magical healing or restoration attempts. During this period, the affected hag is severely compromised, unable to cast spells requiring line of sight, unable to navigate unfamiliar terrain, and vulnerable to attacks she cannot see coming. For beings who spend centuries cultivating careful control over their environment and circumstances, this temporary blindness represents a terrifying loss of agency. The destruction of a Hag Eye often leads to the Covey immediately withdrawing to secure locations until the blinded member recovers, temporarily disrupting whatever schemes they were prosecuting. To understand the ultimate potential of Hagkind, one must examine the historical figure known as Malagard, the Hag Countess, whose rise to power and eventual fate represent perhaps the most extraordinary chapter in the Chronicle of Hags across all planes of existence. Malagard's story unfolds in the 9 Hells of Baator, a realm of rigid hierarchy where law and evil combine to create an infernal bureaucracy of damnation. Within this structure, she achieved something unprecedented. She ruled Malbolge, the 6th layer of Baator, despite being not a devil of any kind, but rather a night hag of exceptional power and cunning. Her ascension to power came through opportunity and betrayal. She had been the lover of Moloch, an archdevil who previously ruled Malbolge. When Asmodeus, the supreme ruler of all the 9 hells, cast down Moloch in punishment for failures and transgressions, the throne of Malbolge stood temporarily empty. In the chaos of transition, Malagard moved decisively to claim power, using her formidable cunning to outmaneuver potential rivals and establish herself as the new ruler. Her success in this endeavor stands as testimony to her exceptional capabilities, as the other Archdukes of Hell, all of them being powerful devils with ancient lineages and vast resources, accepted her rule, however, reluctantly. Malagard's physical appearance marked her as something beyond typical night hag morphology. While she possessed the characteristic bruised, blistered flesh of her species, she had developed additional features that suggested either unique evolution or deliberate magical modification. From her back sprouted a pair of wings, tattered and ratty, covered in black feathers that seemed perpetually molting. These wings gave her a terrible appearance, like a dark inversion of celestial imagery, an anti-angel whose presence mocked everything that wings typically symbolized. Her breath carried the stench of rotting meat, so powerful that even devil's creatures, native to a realm of sulfur and torment, found it unpleasant. She adopted as her personal symbol a pair of black feathered wings displayed against a white background, ensuring that all who saw her banner understood exactly what she represented. Her rulership of Malbolge centered on a bizarre and magnificent stronghold. The layer's terrain consisted of endless slopes down which enormous boulders perpetually tumbled, an environment of constant motion and danger. Malagard established her palace within one of these gigantic, tumbling stones. Through powerful magic, she hollowed out the boulder's interior, creating a labyrinth of chambers that remained stable and navigable despite the stone's constant rotation and movement down the slopes. This mobile fortress meant that anyone seeking audience with the Hag Countess first had to locate the correct boulder among countless thousands, then time their approach to board the roll, pudding stone without being crushed, and finally navigate interior passages that rotated unpredictably as the boulder tumbled. Within her mobile palace, Malagard maintained a court that reflected her nature and priorities. She kept a personal covey of 3 night hags, each cultivated to maximum power, representing her inner circle of advisors and enforcers. Beyond this core group, she surrounded herself with green hags, anices, and medusas, creating a diverse assemblage of monstrous feminine power. She maintained extensive stables of nightmares, the fiendish horses that served as transportation across the plains, and she particularly favored a mighty individual specimen she named Bloodcurdle, a nightmare of exceptional size and malevolence that served as her personal mount. In combat, the Hag Countess wielded a unique weapon that reflected both her power and her sadistic nature, a massive blood-feeding flaming greatsword. This weapon combined multiple magical properties into a single devastating tool. The flames that wreathed the blade dealt additional fire damage to anything struck, while the blood-feeding enchantment literally drained life force from victims, transferring their vitality to the wielder. In Malagard's hands, this weapon could cleave through armor and flesh with equal ease, leaving cauterized wounds that prevented healing while simultaneously sustaining her through stolen life. Her magical capabilities far exceeded those of standard night hags. While she lacked the heartstone that typical night hags use to facilitate their dream hauntings, she compensated with a vastly expanded array of spell-like abilities. Her repertoire included magic that could reshape terrain, summon powerful allies, inflict crippling curses, and defend against virtually any form of attack. Her bite carried supernatural virulence. Those bitten by her jagged yellow teeth risked contracting demon fever, a lethal disease that caused rapid physical deterioration, high fever, and eventual death if left untreated. Despite her formidable personal power, her monstrous court, and her command over legions of devils assigned to Malbolge, Malagard's rule contained fundamental vulnerabilities. She was not a devil, and this distinction mattered deeply within Baator's rigid hierarchy. The archdukes of other layers viewed her with suspicion and contempt, seeing her rule as a temporary aberration rather than a legitimate component of Hell's order. Asmodeus himself apparently tolerated rather than approved of her reign, allowing her to remain in power primarily because her administrative effectiveness maintained productivity in Malbolge's infernal industries. This tenuous position collapsed when Asmodeus decided to install his daughter Glacia as the new ruler of Malbolge. Rather than simply executing Malagard or banishing her from Hell, the powers of Baator enacted a punishment so elaborate and horrifying that its description challenges comprehension. They chose to use the Hag Countess's own living body as the raw material to physically reshape the entire 6th layer of Hell. The transformation began without warning. Malagard, going about her affairs in her tumbling palace, suddenly collapsed onto the slopes of Malbolge as agonizing spasms racked her body. The barren soil of the layer, normally loose and unstable, solidified around her wrists and ankles, physically seizing her and pinning her to the ground. she began to grow, her body swelling to impossible proportions as every cell underwent forced expansion. Within minutes, she had grown to the size of a giant. Within hours, she exceeded Titan scale. The growth continued relentlessly, exponentially, as she screamed continuously in agony. As she expanded to continental proportions, her skeletal structure began to distort under its own mass. Her bones stretched and cracked, shattering through skin from internal pressure. Her ribs exploded outward from her chest with concussive force, tearing through flesh and continuing to grow even after breaching her body cavity. These extruded ribs calcified rapidly, hardening into pale stone and continuing to extend upward and outward. Eventually, her ribcage formed a series of vast, arching mountain ranges that encircled the entire layer of malbolge, pale white ridges visible from anywhere in the realm. Her skull underwent perhaps the most dramatic transformation. It expanded to truly massive proportions, swelling until it became Asiea, a vast dome-like fortress that now serves as Glacia's personal palace. The bone bleached to brilliant white, creating a structure simultaneously beautiful and deeply disturbing, a palace built from the skull of a living being who was transformed against her will. Glacia commanded that the empty eye sockets of this fortress skull be fitted with enormous panes of red glass. These serve both aesthetic and defensive purposes. Glacia can discharge blasts of hellfire through these red glass eyes, incinerating threats to her domain while maintaining the architectural symbolism of her palace literally looking out across her realm. The Hag Countess's internal organs, exposed as her body was pulled apart by impossible growth, were buried beneath the shifting earth of Malbolge, creating an extensive network of subterranean passages. These fleshy catacombs twist through the ground beneath the layer's surface, creating a cramped, organic dungeon where Glacia's minions now dwell. The walls of these passages consist of preserved tissue, perpetually warm and occasionally bleeding, creating an environment of profound discomfort and psychological horror for those forced to inhabit them. Lakes of bile and other bodily fluids erupted to the surface during the transformation, creating pools and rivers of viscous, toxic liquid that now mar Malbolge's landscape. The Hag Countess's hair, coarse and gray, took root in the flaky white soil that covers much of the layer. From these implanted follicles grew an entire forest of greasy, hellish trees, a dense woodland of bizarre vegetation that inhabitants now call the Hair Forest. These trees possess unsettling properties, their bark feeling more like hardened keratin than wood, their branches growing in patterns that suggest hair more than normal tree structure. Her fingers, as they were pulled outward by her expanding body, stretched and hardened into towering white spires that now serve as landmarks across Malbolge. Her teeth, torn from her jaw by the violent growth, sank into the earth and created what has become an inexhaustible ivory mine. Devils assigned to Malbolge extract this ivory and ship it to other layers, where it is carved into various items, ensuring that the Hag Countess provides economic value even in her transformed state. Throughout this entire apocalyptic transformation, Malagard screamed, the pain of having every cell in her body forced to expand, of her bones shattering and extruding through her flesh, of her organs being ripped apart and scattered across an entire layer of hell, exceeded any torment typically inflicted even in Baator. Her screams echoed across Malbolge continuously, a sound of such anguish and despair that it affected even devils, creatures normally immune to sympathy or mercy. Even after her death became an objective medical certainty, after her body had been torn apart and redistributed across an entire layer of hell, the screaming continued. The psychic echo of her final moments remains imprinted on Malbolge itself, a supernatural residue that can still be heard by those sensitive to such things. Travelers in certain regions of the layer report hearing faint screaming on the wind, the ghost of the Hag Countess's agony still reverberating through the realm. From the rotting remnants of her flesh, a new form of devil spontaneously generated, the Caliban. These creatures are hideously malformed, tumorous things that bear only the vaguest resemblance to humanoid form. Each Caliban retains fragmentary memories from Malagard's existence, confused and partial recollections that torment them with suggestions of a past they cannot fully access or understand. They exist in states of perpetual, maddening pain, their malformed bodies constantly aching. Driven by instinct they do not understand, Calibans compulsively attempt to gather together, pressing their misshapen bodies against each other in what appears to be an unconscious attempt to rebuild their progenitor, to reverse the catastrophic transformation and restore Malagard to existence. This futile behavior provides them no relief. They simply continue to suffer, simultaneously experiencing the psychic echoes of Malagard's screaming death and serving the very Archduchess who engineered their creator's destruction. Glacia rules Malbolge, from Ossia now, seated within a palace built from her predecessor's skull, commanding devils who dwell in passages carved from her predecessor's flesh, overlooking forests that grew from her predecessor's hair, all while Calibans formed from her predecessor's remains labor in service to her regime. The entire arrangement serves as both practical infrastructure and ultimate statement of dominance, a demonstration that even ruling a layer of hell provides no security against the will of Asmodeus. The tale of the Hag Countess stands as the ultimate example of Hag potential and Hag vulnerability. Malagard achieved heights of power that no other Hag in recorded history has matched, ruling an entire layer of hell through cunning and force of will. Yet this very success made her a target, and when the powers of hell moved against her, her punishment exceeded anything inflicted on lesser beings, transforming her into the very landscape of the realm she once ruled. In the annals of the multiverse, few fates demonstrate more clearly that for beings who traffic in corruption and evil, no amount of power provides ultimate security. The Hag, in all her forms, represents a particular flavor of evil that combines patient cruelty, calculating intelligence, and profound corruption of natural law. From the newly transformed woman still adjusting to the change, to the ancient green hag patiently cultivating a generation of corrupted youth, to the night hag trading stolen souls in the markets of the lower planes, to the ultimate example of Malagard herself. These creatures embody malevolence that transcends simple violence. They are predators of innocence, corrupters of virtue, and living proof that the most devastating evil often comes wearing a kind face and speaking with a gentle voice. Understanding the Hag is understanding that evil need not roar. Sometimes it simply whispers and waits and smiles.